So now that I've introduced you to the different types of questions, let's take a look at going through a passage, and then I've also introduced you in this particular passage to the first and last reading method. We read through it in a previous video about strapping or saving our cities and ourselves from the automobile. Remember that you have five passages, 52 questions, 65 minutes, about 13 minutes per passage. So you spend no more than 5 minutes reading. We read. Now we're going to start tackling some of the questions. And I'm going to get my fat face out of here, and I'm going to start looking at some of these questions. So number 11, what function does the third paragraph, lines 20 to 34, serve in the passage as a whole? Here's a main idea question or author purpose question. So, let's go to the third paragraph then and look at lines 20 through 34 and say, what does it do? And if I'm effectively skimming the passage, which I did, public transportation in many minds is the opposite of glamorous, squalid last resort for those with one too many impaired driving charges. So it's talking about how public transportation is a poor alternative. So, what function does the third paragraph have in the passage as a whole? Public transportation in many minds is the opposite of glamour. So it's talking about how the population of New York, talk about the subway system, and then but it's the opposite of glamour in many minds. So the best, how does it serve in the passage? Well, it acknowledges that a practice favored by the author of the passage has some limitations. It has some limitations. And given the opportunity, who wouldn't drive? And so anybody who's waited far too long over wrestling in the shuttles to go big knows that transport can be underfunded, ill-maintained, and ill-planned. So how does it function? It's functioning to say, well, it is less than glamorous and it's less than the author expects. So main idea, author purpose. You might want to skip that question if it's a struggle for you. It illustrates with details the arguments made in the first two paragraphs. No, it does not. It illustrates the opposite. So if you're eliminating answer choices, that's how you could eliminate them. And it demonstrates, it gives an overview of the problem. No, it does not. It advocates for abandoning a practice that for which the passages as a whole favors, provides most favorable data. No, it does not. Which choice does the author explicitly cite as an advantage of the automobile travel in North America? Here is what I'm talking about with a two-part question. Here's the two-parter. I'm going to go back to this. Here's the two-part question. If you have, be on the lookout, move your eyes down and say, well, this is a two-part question. So the choice the author explicitly cites is an advantage of automobile travel. So let's go and see if we can go back and find. We might be better off answering this question first about an advantage of automobile travel. Does lines 5 through 9 do that? Does lines 5 through 9 talk about an advantage of automobile travel? No, it just gives us a thesis. Does lines 20 through 24 do that? No, in fact, it talks about the opposite argument. Lines 24 through 26, does it do that? Lines 20, in much of North America, their right take is a depressing experience. No, it does not talk about an advantage. So 32 through 34, does it talk about an advantage? Anybody who has waited for 32 through 34, given the opportunity, who wouldn't drive? Hopping a car almost always gets you to your destination more quickly. Yes. So therefore, it would be D, giving an advantage, talking about what would it be talking about? C, speed. So see how these two connect together, 12 and 13. So sometimes you're better off looking at, and I just demonstrated looking at the opposite, looking at the next question down to find the evidence. So this is command of evidence or detailed question. These are detailed questions. You're going to find them specifically in the passage. And again, here's another main idea, command of evidence question with number 14, but it also skip your eye down. Always skip your eye down when you're looking at these central ideas and make sure we're not looking for evidence of this. So the central idea of the fourth paragraph is what? which choice provides the best evidence that talks about the central idea. So let's look at each of these lines. 35, does 35 provide the central idea of the passage? No, it does not. It just gives us one thing. Does 30, it just gives us one little anecdote? Does 35 through 37 do that? Well, it's the topic sentence, so that's very likely that it would, right? Done right, public transportation can be faster, more comfortable, cheaper than the private automobile. I even underline that. So it looks like that might give an advantage. 37 through 40, let's just check them out if we have time. So now that's just giving an example about Shanghai. And then 44 through 48, does that give an advantage? In provincial, no, it just gives us another example. So the central idea is some public transportation, would it be European countries excel at public transportation? Well, those are examples, but that's not the central idea, right? America should mimic foreign public transportation. No, that's then the central idea. It didn't talk about how they should. It didn't talk about that. Much international public transportation is engineered for passengers to work while on board. No, so some public transportation systems are superior to travel by private automobile. This should be an example of the central idea, supported by lines 35 through 37, you see. So if we go back up, 35 through 37, done right, public transportation can be faster, more comfortable, and cheaper than the private automobile. This is the main idea, and there's the evidence that supports it. There's an example of command of evidence, main idea, and this is the detail question that goes along with it. So you see, that's an example of how detail and main idea. Oh, excuse me. This I'm getting on my right slide here. How detail and main idea can come to work together. You'll have connecting questions. This is a common theme throughout the SAT. These connecting questions to an inference or generalization question, second of a two set, or it's going to go for a specific line. And it does that with the main idea too. Remember, I mentioned that the main idea can sometimes be found, or the purpose of the passages can sometimes be found by looking at the second question as well. Okay, back to this. If my thing would load. Okay, let's look at a vocabulary and context question. It's number 16. In line 58, credit most nearly means what? So we need to go back and look at the words around line 58, what credit most nearly means. And when we look at the lines around line 58 in the process of, if you credit the demographers, this transit trend has legs. The millennials who reach adulthood around the turn of the century. So credit the demographers probably means it probably means believe, right? Not necessarily endow. No, that wouldn't work. Attribute. No. So if you believe the demographers, then this has legs. In other words, if they're credible. In line 61, favor most nearly means, let's look up favor and what it means in this context. The millennials who reach adulthood around the turn of the century, now outnumbered baby boomers, tend to favor cities over suburbs and are far more willing than their parents to ride buses and subways. So favor in this case means they prefer something, right? So sure enough, indulge, no. Resemble, no. Serve, but prefer. There it is, prefer. It means they prefer. So these are 16 and 17 are examples of 16 and 17 are classic examples of, and I just demonstrated how do we go back and find the meaning of the word in context. Here's a command of evidence detail question that asks you very specifically which choice best supports the conclusion or the generalization. And here's an example. Here's how it plays into the detail command of evidence and slash general, and I would even say and slash generalization. 70. So in this detail and generalization question, let's go through them. Lines 59 through 63. Does it support the conclusion that public transportation is compatible with the use of personal electronic devices? 59 through 63 talks about credit demographers, the transit has legs. The millennials talk about the turn of the century, baby boomers tend to favor cities, but doesn't talk about personal electronic devices. Does the next one do that? lines 63 through 67. Starts talking about MP3 players, Kindles. Part of the reason they're ease is they can get serious texting done when you're not driving. That's certainly one, right? So, and then line 68 through 70, does that support it? Would that be a close one? Earbuds for commuting, even though there are more teenagers, only 10 million have drive. No. Talking about driver's license. No. 77 through 81 already in their homes, something already in their homes. So already dwellings in older neighborhoods, especially those near light rail, are commanding enormous price. No. So it would be the second one, right? It would be answer choice B that talks about how in line 60 through 67, starting from part to annoyances, that supporting the conclusion that public transportation is compatible with the use of personal electronic devices. So you see how I went through each of the evidences and trying to find the key word there being personal electronic devices. That's the key word there, personal electronic devices. Let me erase that so that we're not getting lost here. Which choice is best supported by the data in the first figure? So here's figure 1. And you can see, based on the general trend, that those employed outside the home are the primary occupation of public transportation passengers. 72% are those employed outside the home. 10.7% are students, and so on. So it's giving percentage breakdown of who takes public transportation. So the number of students using public transportation is greater than the number of retirees. That's certainly true, right? If we look at this, the number of students is 10.7, the number of retired is 6.7. And then you had the number of employed people using public transportation, the number of unemployed people using public transportation is roughly the same. No, that's not true. We can see that. The number of people employed outside the home are less likely to use public transportation than our homemakers. No, that's certainly not true, because look at the people employed outside the home is far greater than the people than homemakers. Unemployed people use public transportation less often than people employed outside the home. Well, it doesn't. This doesn't give frequency. That fooled me at first too. That one fooled me a little bit at first too, because I was like, oh, that's a possibility. No, it's giving frequency, where this is just talking about the number of people who use public transportation, period. So the best answer choice here is A. And this is just a straight data interpretation question. It's just straight data interpretation question. So if you're looking at our question types here, if it ever comes up on my screen, and now my fat face is coming up again, so I'm going to cut me out and wait a minute here while this thing loads. If you look at this, it would be a data type of question. So the question is asking about, just being super slow, data and reading the graph and understanding it. Simply reading the graph and understanding it. This next question is getting a little bit more taken together. The two figures suggest that, so it's a little bit more about charts and graphs, and asking you to interpret data or combine data. So let's take a look at that one as our last question on this particular section. The two figures suggest that people who use public transportation are employed outside the home and take public transportation to work. So how do we look at these together? So let's look at figure 2. What is that telling us? Figure 2 is telling us purpose of public transportation. Figure 2 is telling us the purpose of public transportation in U.S. cities. Why are people taking it? You can see most people are taking it for work, some for school, some for personal business, some for shopping and dining. So certainly those are employed outside the home and take public transportation. Those make up the most people who use them. Are employed outside the home but take public transportation primarily to use in order to run errands. No, that's not true. Those aren't the people that use it the most. Use public transportation during the week but use their private cars on weekends. It doesn't neither of these charts gives us time elements, so that certainly doesn't work. Use public transportation only until they are able to afford to buy a car. It doesn't say when they buy a car. So the only one that's plausible there based on the data is A, they're employed outside the home and take public transportation to work. Here's employed outside the home and take public transportation to work. That is the suggest that most people who use public transportation fall into those categories. So again, this is a chart and graph interpreting data. This is a chart and graph where we're interpreting data. Okay, so these are some examples of question types and how you tackle them taken together with the first and last method. Again, you're not spending more than 13 minutes on this passage. So I went through quite a detailed version of a process of elimination and tackling questions. You may not necessarily need to do that in such detail with them all, but you may need to do that a little bit as you in order to effectively answer the questions. But keep an eye on your time. 5 passages, 13 minutes. If you're getting to 16 and 17 minutes, you don't want to spend that much time with it.